It is February 8th, 2026, and I am going to make some of my elderberry syrup. We have a 2025 harvest down in the freezer. I think it's 2 bags worth. And then we also have some, I believe, up here that I've been thawing out. I think that's from 2025 as well. So I have my mason jars that have all been sterilized. And with this elderberry syrup, it does not need to be canned, but I still like to clean and sterilize my little half-pint jars. This is really a wonderful syrup that I've done previous videos on that I have been making annually now. And we're actually starting to even plant more of our cuttings to have more elderberry bushes. So, join me today. I will show you how to quickly move through making our elderberry syrup. Okay, so this is actually our August 2024 remaining berries. In August 2024, yes. So 2 elderberry preparations that I had done and stuck in the freezer, and they have been thawing overnight. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started since these are already thawed, and aren't those absolutely gorgeous in that color? I don't know if you can see it on here, but oh my gosh, these are just the prettiest color, and they don't lose their color. So this is a syrup that is extremely beneficial going into the winter season. They are an antioxidant berry that will also allow you to be preventative for any type of cold that you might experience. I know myself, if I feel a sniffle or if I feel any type of scratchiness, I will just go ahead and take 2 tablespoons a day. So probably 1 in the morning and 1 at night. Then if you're experiencing more symptoms on a regular basis, then you could take up to 4 tablespoons per day until you don't feel good anymore. You really can't overdose on this because this is a simple berry process with honey and ginger and cloves, and just, it's wonderful. So I'll show you real quick how we're going to go ahead and get these processed. Okay, with these berries, so you can see the color better. Look at this. The color better with the light that's coming through the window, hopefully. But they are just absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so when I say these have already been prepared, that means that I've already gone through the process of removing them from the stems, and that process is on a different video. But for now, that's already been done. And more importantly, I have removed any of the berries that were floating or that were green. Do your research on these berries because they, people have different viewpoints on these types of berries. So I just would recommend you do your own research. But regardless, we're going to move through this processing of our elderberries and enjoy the benefits that they're going to provide. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to go ahead and get our ingredients together. And I've got my distilled water. I'm going to need 2 cups of distilled water, a 1/2 cup of my berries. Okay, and I'm going to need 5 cloves. I'm going to need 1 cinnamon stick. And I'm going to need 1 teaspoon of freshly grated ginger. This is the ginger that we grew this year. I'm just going to simply grate it against my cheese grater. That smells wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to measure out 1 teaspoon of that. Okay, so I have my pot here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to double this recipe because I have several berries ready to go. Some people use dried berries. Do your research on that. I have heard that those work, very well, but I grow my own elderberries, and I also want to use those fresh elderberries. All right, so I have my ingredients here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a cup. And remember, I'm doubling my recipe, so I will leave the recipe for the 1/2 cup in the description. So these were washed, these were destemmed, they were washed 2 to 3 times, and then they were separated out of any stems or any green berries, and then kept in my freezer bag for using later on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and measure out a cup of berries. Okay, I've got my 1 cup of berries measured out, and I would highly recommend you wear an apron and gloves because it will stain. But I don't know if you can see that amazing color. Now you might see some stems. You might see some green berries, but that's okay because we're going to still strain them again after this is all processed before we add our honey. Okay, so I've got a cup of my berries. I want to go ahead and add I've got my 4 cups of distilled water, and you can use a filtered water or distilled. I've got again, I'm doubling my recipe, but you'll use 1 cinnamon stick, so there's 2 for me. I'm going to go ahead and put in 1 teaspoon of ginger, and for mine that's going to be 2 teaspoons. And then 5 whole cloves. For me, it'll be 10. Okay, so you can see all of that in there. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on to a medium to high setting until that boils. Okay, so you can see that my berries are boiling. So what I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to turn my stovetop, and it is a rolling boil. That's what you want. So you just kind of have to judge, don't leave your stovetop to ensure that they don't burn, but just make sure that that is coming to a rolling boil. And then what you're going to do is turn that down to simmer. What I like to do is I like to mash my berries while they're in this simmer stage, just to kind of get that extra juice from those berries. And then what I'm going to do is let this cool and simmer for 30 minutes. You can see that it has been 30 minutes and this syrup smells amazing. This is probably one of my favorite smells in the house. And what I'm doing here is I'm just simply showing you the consistency of the juice that has come from the berries. Now I'm going to take it over to the sink, and I'm simply going to pour the juice out of the pot through a strainer and this cheesecloth. And the benefit of this cheesecloth will, shortly you'll see, it's going to allow me to, as I'm straining through the cheesecloth, I can then pull the cheesecloth up out of the strainer, tighten it by squeezing out the extra juice. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to ensure that the liquid that has been sitting in the pot is at the right temperature in order for me to then add the honey without compromising the natural antibacterial properties. So in order to do that, I want to go ahead and just take a thermometer and make sure that that liquid is between 122 to no more than 158 degrees Fahrenheit. I like to keep it at 120. That's just the number that I usually remember, just to ensure that I know that I'm okay with adding the honey into the liquid once I'm ready. So now what I'm going to do is, it's important to wear gloves when doing this because this will stain. And as you can see, I have an apron on. So just take my advice. You want to go ahead and wear some gloves. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to squeeze out this extra juice by squeezing from the top down through the cheesecloth, all of that remaining juice and berry goodness that it still remains, just so I can get as much of a yield as I possibly can. Okay, now that I have all of the berry juice in the pot, I want to make sure that I and you are using your own local honey. That's really important in order to have the success of the elderberry syrup by using a raw honey in order to, like I said, preserve those vital nutrients in the honey while maintaining its natural antibacterial properties. So by doing so, you're going to have better results. And the other thing that you might want to think about is when you're buying elderberry syrup, if you decide not to make it and you just want to buy it, and we also sell it, by the way, but you want to make sure that you buy your elderberry syrup that has been refrigerated. Because if you buy it on the shelf and it's not refrigerated, that does compromise that honey. So just make sure that your elderberry syrup, or I should say your honey, is at that uh, temperature when you add it to your juice between 122 to 158 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, my sweet spot for that is 120 degrees Fahrenheit in order to not compromise those nutrients from the honey. Okay, so I'm going to add 2 cups of honey into my juice. You're going to use 1 cup, but because I'm doubling my batch of elderberry syrup, I'm going to use 2 cups. So you just simply want to pour that into the juice. Okay, so I'm going to finish stirring this up for a few minutes to get that honey nice and mixed in there and dissolved. And once I have that all stirred up in there, I'm going to go ahead and simply add with a funnel on my, these are half pints jars, and they're little jelly jars that I use. So those are my half pints, and you can see what I yield here in a minute. But I'm just simply going to put a funnel on here and get my ladle and get those just below the rim. Give it like a half-inch space, half-inch head space. And then I'm simply going to pour the rest of them in the jars. You can see here that I've yielded 5 jars. And I'm going to take this last jar that's remaining and I'm going to cap it, put it in my refrigerator. It's going to last up to 2 months. Sometimes I might keep it in there longer, but I do believe that it's 2 months that they recommend. Do some research on that. And if I feel something coming on, I have it there. I like to start it usually in January to get me through, those cooler months. And if I feel something coming on, I'll take a tablespoon at night and a tablespoon in the morning as I feel something coming on. And then, of course, as a preventative, take a tablespoon a day. If someone in the house is sick and you don't want to get it, take it as a preventative, 1 tablespoon per day. But do your own research on that. That's what works for my family, and I have been doing this for over 3 years now, going into our 4th. So I am going to enjoy having these in our pantry. And I say pantry, they're actually going to sit in our downstairs refrigerator. And I'm looking forward to just having that comfort knowing that it is here in case any family members visit or the grandchildren visit. And if they are feeling off, I have it ready to go.